Hi, I'm Snez, personal trainer, healthy lifestyle coach, and your guide to feeling your best. This podcast is a segment from my weekly radio show, Wellbeing Wednesdays, broadcast live on 88.6 Plenty Valley FM. It's all about sharing real, practical tips to help you move more, eat better, and live healthier without the overwhelm. Let's dive in, shall we? I'm super excited to welcome a very special guest, third time round this month, Dr. Marie Anderson, a clinical and health psychologist with a deep passion for emotional well-being and holistic health. Marie brings a wealth of knowledge and experience, having spent decades helping people break free from limiting beliefs, develop resilience, and create a more meaningful and balanced life. Her journey into psychology wasn't a straight path herself. She overcame her own self-doubt to pursue her dream, earning her doctorate in health psychology and becoming a leading expert in behaviour change and emotional wellness. Welcome back, Marie.
How are you going, Snez?
Good. How are you going?
I'm going good. The sun's still shining. I'm happy.
Yeah, there's that direct connection. That's another chat for another show, isn't it?
Yeah.
We were chatting about hormesis before. I was going to call you in and then I knew I was running a little bit late for the news. So I thought, no, I won't, because we love to unpack topics quite in depth.
Sure.
But tell me a little bit about hormesis when it comes to like a psychology perspective, because I was really talking about doing physical things.
Yeah. I guess from a psychological perspective, the way that I deal with it is building people's resilience for the things that they might not feel confident about doing, things that they might feel anxious about or worried about. So helping them engage in activities that they might be scared about or fear.
Yeah.
And breaking them down to small parts so that they deal with one small part at a time, and it is building their resilience. So it's building their tolerance for something that might not like to do, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
That's really good. And I think we might dive back. We're creating all these segments as we go, but I think that was something that I wanted to talk, that came up for me this week that I wanted to chat to you about, but we won't do it in this show because we are talking emotions in this show. But it was about that fear that I'm hearing a lot about of people being quite concerned about stepping into a gym.
Okay.
And all the thoughts around that. And it's not even just like gyms as well, but also going to a personal trainer and what that could potentially mean, the discomfort, the perceived discomfort of all of that. So we will unpack that on a different show.
Sure.
But today we are talking about all things emotions, and I'm really keen to have this conversation because we feel our emotions. And in the space that I work with my members, I talk a lot about, or I hear a lot about emotional eating, but actually really unpacking what emotions are, what they're there for, what's their purpose. It's not something that we really talk a lot about. And going back, I think it was a couple of shows ago, you mentioned, I think it may have been off air, you said you talked about emotions having formulas. And I was like, right, we need to talk about that.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're talking about today. So let's start. What are emotions?
Right. Well, Snez, I love emotions. Personally, I don't know, maybe it's the Italian in me.
Yeah.
Right? I love them. I know that there are some emotions that, can compromise our well-being, but generally I think emotions can be good. So what are they? Emotions, from a biological perspective, are essentially chemicals in our body and our mind that create a physical experience. From another perspective, emotions are a automatic physiological response to a stimulus, and by stimulus I mean a situation or an event, and that's something outside of ourselves, or something inside of ourselves such as a memory or a thought. So it is a physiological reaction to that. There are several theories about emotions, but a popular one is by a guy, psychologist Paul Ekman. And in the 70s and the 80s, he came up with the idea that there are 6 or 7 primary emotions or basic emotions. And he decided this because his research that he did was global, and he said that they're universal emotions, so all cultures have.
Yep. can you list those? I'm just
Absolutely.
curious.
Yep.
Which ones are they? Because what I love about this topic is that you're giving some real depth and explanation, I guess, because emotion, like, I don't know if it's just me and the way we were brought up, not being Italian, but I just feel that we always have to kind of put a lid on emotions and not fully express them. And that could be happy emotions as well. Like,
Sure.
I remember Mum used to say, and this is really old school, right? But she'd be like, stop laughing so much. Why are you guys, because it was obnoxious to laugh out loud or whatever, but then you couldn't get too angry or you couldn't get to anything really. And I love emotions as well. So, but share with us those 6 emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going on what you were saying about growing up, it was kind of the opposite for me growing up. There was always laughter, there was always anger, there was always, lots of emotion. And that's what felt normal.
Yeah.
So the primary emotions or the basic emotions are happiness, sadness, anger, surprise. Let's see if I can remember without checking my notes.
I was actually going to look them up for you just in case. I was like, this is a long shot. I've asked her to just rattle these off.
Fear, of course, there's fear. Let's not forget fear. Disgust and contempt. So they're the basic emotions. And that does not to say that there aren't any other emotions. Of course, there are other emotions. But the rule of thumb, if you like, the idea is that other emotions are secondary emotions.
Yes. So they're like the base colours, I guess.
It's a good way of saying it.
Yeah, that's how I sort of, because I imagine, like, say, for example, disgust, that's like, I think, I don't know if I really feel that a lot, but I can see when you colour it in with some other things.
Correct.
How it is primarily that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and the ones that are secondary or seen as complex are emotions that Paul Ekman at least said that they can look different depending on the culture, or they might not look as obvious. And that's why he came up with those primary emotions in terms of that.
So the original topic that we opened with was, do emotions have formulas? Like, I'm so curious to find out what you mean by that, because for me, it just seems like emotions are things that are coming at us, happening to us, and not something that you could probably explain in a formula. So I'm super interested to
absolutely
to hear about this, because I think it's so important to get this sort of education, because when a lot of consumption of food is connected to emotion.
Absolutely.
And when we can understand this, do you feel that it does then help to disconnect the two?
Yeah, that's the complex question in terms of disconnecting.
Yeah, I know. I realised as soon as I asked it. and just quickly for everyone, all the listeners, off air we discussed last week that we couldn't answer too many complex questions, and I think I'm the problem asking him. And I just saw Marie's face there go, "You've done that again, Snez." But okay,
well, it'll turn into
quickly.
a lecture.
Yeah,
but no, but we can certainly look at emotional eating, if you like, at another session, because I do work with a lot of.
Okay, so going back to the formulas then.
So formulas, from a certain point of view in science, we may not necessarily look at that emotions have formulas. It's kind of the way that the word that I use, but certainly emotions have patterns. But when you kind of look at what I'm going to talk about, it's hard to think why they're not a formula, if you like.
Okay.
As opposed to patterns. But I think we look at formula, the word itself, to think when we think about maths, right? With maths, there's a clear-cut 1 + 1 = 2, right? Or physics or chemistry, right? So formulas under those conditions are predictable. And maybe we haven't really found a way that emotions can be predictable. But what I'm going to discuss will help you kind of understand them as patterns, but I will always talk about them, as formulas. So if we think, I'll just talk about a couple of examples, if you like. So the rule of thumb is that if you take the primary emotions or a combination of the primary emotions, then that will equal a secondary emotion, okay? So if we look at one example, if we look at fear and surprise, then that will give you alarm.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yep.
If we look at fear plus anger plus disgust, that will give you hate.
Oh, hang on a tick. I need to unpack that one. Can you say that one again? So fear.
Fear.
So we're afraid of
anger.
and we're angry about that.
and disgust.
And then we're disgusted by that, and that gives us hate.
So if you think about hate, something you hate, you can see all those emotions in there.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I mean, we could look at that one, I don't know, in the context of being stuck in traffic.
Yeah.
So who likes being stuck in traffic?
No one likes that.
Nobody, okay.
Well, I do. I wave at people.
Okay.
But that's when I'm not needing to be anywhere. That's where I don't feel stuck.
Sure.
That's where people around me, I guess, are being stuck. But I imagine I wouldn't like it if I feel stuck and I need to get somewhere. I'd hate that too.
Absolutely. But we've certainly got anger.
Yeah.
And we're kind of disgusted that, the cars aren't moving.
Yeah. At a basic level.
And then maybe we've got fear because we want to move and go down the middle line or whatever, but we're afraid because of all the oncoming traffic or the police, the officer.
It could also be, for me, I've got a sense of fear of being late and not getting to somewhere on
Absolutely.
time. That's a massive one.
Correct. Yeah. And that's a really good example as well. So other examples might be sadness and anger can give us frustration.
Oh, do you know, this is really fascinating because when I feel frustration a lot in different situations, and sometimes I can't really unpack why that is, but if you're telling me that, what was that, a combination
of sadness and anger.
Oh, so then when I'm looking at that, then I can understand myself better.
You're way ahead of me.
Oh, it was just the light bulb moment.
I'm glad that you brought it up. I mean, that's kind of part of my next conversation.
Yeah.
But yes, so if we can unpack, say in that example, if we can unpack, well, what's the sadness that's there and what are you angry about? So if someone says, I'm frustrated, then we can unpack some of the other emotions associated with that, which might be easier to unpack than just looking at, the frustration side of it.
Do you have more combos?
Well, what I wanted to say is that's one way of looking at formulas, but the one that I work with a lot in therapy is looking at the main emotions that come up tend to be depression, anxiety, so they're secondary emotions, and anger and guilt, they're main ones, right?
So do you have the formula for anxiety? Do you have that one?
The anxiety one, yes. So the way to look at anxiety is that it's about worry that something bad might happen in the future.
Okay.
So in every case of anxiety,
yes,
if you look at it from that perspective, so people will often come in and say, but what if?
Yeah.
As soon as someone says what if, it's something that they're worried about in the future.
Yeah.
So you can see that when we look at that from that perspective, it looks like a formula. It's kind of like, okay, you say what if.
Yeah.
I know that that's straight away anxiety.
Yeah.
Right? If you've got anxiety, I know that there's what if.
Yeah.
And then you look at what are those things that they're concerned about in the future.
Yeah.
And then unpack those things.
Because sometimes when we look at those things, even recognising it in that way, we can then just, when we can bring that to light, I guess, we can recognise, actually, that's probably an unrealistic concern.
Sure.
Or I don't really feel like that, or maybe there's I'm not sure why I'm feeling like that, or you can sort of start to question that, I guess.
Absolutely.
Whereas when you're dealing with anxiety itself, you don't know where or what that is.
No.
That's really powerful.
And most people think about it as in the present. So I'm anxious about going to this party.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Well, the party's in the future for starters. But to them it feels like it's right now.
Yeah.
And then when you unpack what the concern is about that party, okay, usually that leads into social anxiety.
Yeah.
And social anxiety is all about judgment, the fear of judgment.
Yeah.
Right? And then you unpack where that comes from, right? So that kind of brings me to the formula that I use with most of these is to look at what's the situation, what's the perception, and what comes with perception and so it's how we interpret in that situation comes with thoughts, and then it's the thoughts, whether they're the quality of the thoughts will then dictate what the emotion is.
Yeah, right.
Right. So by looking at using that formula, so I call it a formula, by looking at that formula or that pattern, then we can help the individual unpack every element of that. Normally we know what the emotion is straight away.
Yeah.
because it's an automatic reaction to the situation. So we normally know that straight away, and we normally know the situation. So we know the two ends, but it's the bits in the middle that actually are creating the emotion.
Awesome, Dr. Marie. Now we're going to go into how do we make sense of these emotions? How do we make sense of emotions?
Okay. So I'm going to put a spanner in the works. The way that we make sense of emotions are through feelings. Now,
So how is that different? Sorry, I'm just going to go one back from that.
I was looking at your face.
I was like, Okay, because I would probably think that they're one and the same, no?
Look, we do use the words emotions and feelings interchangeably to mean the same thing, but from a certain point of view, they are distinctly different. So if emotions is the automatic physiological response to a situation, then the feeling is our subjective mental awareness of the emotion.
Ah, right, distinctly different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, they're an overlap.
Because one's kind of happening to us. Is the other one, can I sort of say, is the other one what we think of what's happening to us? Okay.
Yeah. So feelings are how we describe and interpret the emotion.
So,
I know, get your head around that one.
no, but then that just made me think though, our feelings, if they're our interpretation, it could actually be anything.
Right. Absolutely. So you've got the primary one.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I've got a couple examples I'll go through, but we've got your primary one. So another way to make sense of emotions is through facial expressions, and this is how we came up with the primary emotions, is the science behind facial expressions, okay? So, you know, the look that you gave me before was, you know, convoluted. You know? Right? So, and it was surprise too.
Yeah, it was surprise.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's another way that we make sense of emotions, is that we can see it on people's facial expressions. Yeah. Okay. So, but feelings are the way that we mentally describe the emotion. So let's use an example. If we're looking at happiness, then the feeling that we might describe the situation that is making us happy is we might use the word joy.
Yeah.
Or we might use the word contentment. So these are secondary emotions.
Yeah.
But we use them as feelings as well. And it's really clear the facial expression of happiness. You know, there's a smile on someone's face. You know, there's the wrinkles around the eyes. There's the cheekbones, you know, that are up. So I guess it was just interesting to throw that one in to help people understand that emotions and feelings have got that little bit of the distinct. Because we often say, we don't say I emotion about this situation. We say I feel.
Yeah, but what I found really interesting about when you explained it in that way is that depending on what our perception is, so we could theoretically feel different things, and in sometimes we could probably be feeling something as a result of our interpretation that isn't really a helpful interpretation of an emotion.
Well, yes, but it is our interpretation. And
so we can't be consciously aware of changing that if it's not working for us?
Yeah, we can be consciously. Well, we need to learn to be consciously aware.
Okay.
And, you know, I talk about that in a little later on.
Okay. So let's go into the purpose of emotions and how they serve us from an evolutionary perspective as well, because I think that will help us to really understand why they're there and why they're so relevant to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, you know, most things have got an evolutionary purpose, but emotions help us adapt to our environment. Emotions have helped us to become social animals. Emotions help us read, you know, the other person and respond accordingly. Emotions help us move culturally and have a culture, in fact. You know, imagine living in a society where everyone is just deadpan. Yeah. Right? We wouldn't have parties, we wouldn't have celebrations, you know, we wouldn't have funerals, we wouldn't have anything because there was nothing to feel. Yeah. Right? So from an evolutionary perspective, it allows us to survive and make our cultural experience for ourselves from that perspective. I do have a couple of examples where emotions have helped us. So fear and anxiety protect us from danger, basically, right?
Yeah.
So if we're afraid of something or we feel anxious about something, we're being told that there's a threat.
Yeah.
So we then protect ourselves. Love, affection and empathy help us bond to others.
Yeah.
So that's about the relationships, okay? Attraction and desire help us to find a partner so that we can, have children and the species survives.
Yeah.
So these are all examples. Pride, excitement and happiness help us get motivated to achieve our goals.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we can see that emotions and feelings do help us have a colourful life.
Yeah, and a quality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
A quality that makes us human, I guess.
Absolutely. It definitely is what helps us, be human. And maybe another one, shame and embarrassment help us conform to our social norms. Right?
Is that ever good?
Conforming to our social norms?
Yeah.
Well, that's probably another topic. But
because I just lean into these other topics like you're gonna magically answer them with one word.
but if I could say one,
but I love that you don't, by the way.
Yes, right. But if I could just say, one word or one line about that, I guess let's think about it from the perspective of road rules. If we all did whatever we wanted, then there'd be more dead people on the road. Right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you live in a culture that
is restrictive,
is indifferent, say, to harming animals, then maybe not. Maybe there's other values that we want to discuss about that. We don't. So there's an example of where a lot of people would say that's not a social norm that we want to have shame and embarrassment about. Okay, so it's one of those. It's kind of like it's a yin and a yang thing. Sometimes it's helpful and then sometimes it's not.
But moving on, I wanted to really get stuck into how do we manage and moderate our emotions?
I guess a lot of the classic things are deep breathing, meditation, yoga, relaxation. These are the things that we talk a lot about.
And is that because it gives us just an opportunity in that moment to actually think about our response? What's the benefit of doing that?
Sure.
Does it just break the cycle of the way that the emotions work, or how does that help us?
Yeah.
Like, I know it helps us, but I'm just wanting to understand it a bit deeper.
Yeah. Clearly, when we're confronted with a situation, sometimes it's difficult to engage in some deep breathing in that moment because our emotions are automatic. But if we engage in those activities on a daily basis or regular basis, where we do deep breathing, practice it every other day, or we do yoga twice a week, what it's doing is it's teaching the nervous system to sustain calm and activate the parasympathetic nervous system, so that if we do these activities often enough, then we are teaching or we're conditioning our body to engage that way under situations that might activate more severe emotions.
Oh, right. Wow. Yep.
So these are, we talk about these all the time, and I'm sure that you've talked about these a lot, in your program. So these are ways to learn to manage our reactivity to situations. The best one that I like, obviously, to work with in therapy is awareness. So becoming more aware of how you feel about certain situations. And the more that you can see yourself reacting in situations, or even just to thoughts, we often have these reactions to thoughts. The more that we can become aware and then use that little formula that I said before to unpack what we're feeling and what we're thinking, that is how we get to the source of our reaction, and then we reframe the situation or reframe what we're thinking from that perspective. So if the situation is, we're stuck in traffic, our perception is we're going to be late, using your example, we're going to be late, and so, we're feeling frazzled about that. what are the thoughts? The thoughts might be, I'm going to be late, I'm going to get into trouble, I'm going to lose my job. So these are often thoughts that we're having, and therefore the emotion is going to be fear, it's going to be anxiety, it's going to be worry. Once we identify the thoughts, we can say, well, let's reframe that thought. Am I going to lose my job? Well, not necessarily. I've been there for 2 years. I've been quite reliable. Things happen.
I can make a phone call. I can let them know or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that changes the emotion.
Yeah.
And as soon as you can change your thoughts, you change the emotion. And as soon as you change the emotion, you're much more indifferent or neutral in the situation.
And therefore in control, I guess.
Absolutely, because that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about feeling like we're in control.
Yeah, because that's when we think about emotions, we can feel like we're just at the mercy of them sometimes, and they're just taking over us and we don't know what to do with them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a quick question though. My question was going to be, so once we do feel heightened, so we weren't able to unpack the emotion and to, exactly what you described in that space. We can't bring awareness to it, and we've kind of we feel overcome by fear or anger, or what can we do at the peak of that? And how long does that last? Is there a cycle of that? How do we come out of that? What do we do then?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, being Italian, I have a lot of those moments.
It's so funny that you say that because I'm married to an Italian and we kind of get each other now. We're celebrating 25 years of marriage this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But when we first started and when we first got married, and when there were situations, John would love an argument. And I'm not arguing person.
Okay. So me and my husband.
Yeah. It was really hard for him. He'd be like, can you just yell back and let's get it over and done with, Yeah. So go on.
Absolutely.
That's funny.
Look, I think there is a difference. I think there is a difference between that cultural experience of, having an argument and being loud and obnoxious.
Yeah, and what doing with these big emotions,
Correct.
I guess. Yeah.
Because in our culture, or people who grow up in that culture, they can calm down relatively quickly afterwards, because what they've learned is we have an argument and then it's all over and we're back to ground zero.
Oh, right.
And so we're not left with that heightened experience.
Or the guilt of it, or then it moves into something different.
Or the uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
Correct, right?
The awkwardness.
So we just literally get over it, It's what we learn.
Okay, so can we apply that to most emotions? Feel it, move on, keep going?
Absolutely. But that does require awareness. So that's why I come back to awareness is really important. So if we know that we have a regular reactivity to a certain situation and it heightens us to the degree that we don't have control over that emotion and it lasts, that feeling lasts for, days on end, let alone hours, then what we want is being aware of it and go, okay, I know that I'm going to respond that way in that situation. Simple things like the cognitive stuff I talked about might be too complicated for that in the short term.
Yeah.
So the simple things is take time out.
Yeah.
Go out in the garden.
Away.
Go somewhere. If you play guitar, play the guitar. Go somewhere, do something that is literally going to bring you back down by activating the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So do an activity that brings you to that space.
Yeah, that's really good, because then you reset.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Journalising.
Yep.
Sit down. If you don't know that there's an activity, we'll sit down and write about it.
Yep.
Give the paper everything you got.
That's such a good activity. That's such a good activity. And have you ever heard of the morning papers, actually? It's an activity out of
No.
Yeah, we'll have to share that. But we need to finish off on a question about language, I think, because this was something that you brought up, and the words that we use and how they can affect our emotions and how we can kind of help ourselves, I guess, at home with working through our emotions. So the conversation about language.
Yeah, look, you know what? Language is everything. Language is everything from a cultural perspective. Language is everything from a social perspective. Language is everything in terms of just communicating and getting our needs met, right, and other people's needs met. So language is everything when it comes to emotions. And the science actually does tell us that words matter.
Yeah.
Whether we use negative words, whether we use positive words, they do influence the way that our body and our mind work. There's even research that says that words influence our genes' expression.
Wow, that's huge.
Isn't that powerful?
Especially considering that if we all dived into our own heads, how negative we can be towards ourselves.
A lot.
And so if that's affecting our gene expression and we're trying to get to the gym 3 times a week and eat organic, unprocessed foods, it's not really working for us, is it?
Absolutely
if we've got this, this self-talk that's, and I have heard of this information, and it's very progressive and it's so impactful in terms of really starting to pay attention, because we can be out there, doing all the latest things to improve our health. But if that is in the background, tell us more about that. I'm absolutely fascinated by this topic.
Well, we know that negative thoughts and words produce stress hormones and neurotransmitters that are basically toxic for our body, okay? Whereas positive thoughts and words produce healing proteins. So you can see, when you think about it from that perspective, if we spend a lot of our time thinking negatively, doubting ourselves, gossiping about other people in a negative way, you can see why we get sick. Yeah. Because there's a lot of toxins that are going through, our system. Whereas on the other hand, if you've ever met somebody who's really good at maintaining that positivity about themselves, about other people, they just look lit up. Yeah. And they look healthy, don't they? Yeah. Right. So it's something to remember about the words that we use, that they do harm us, or they can harm us if they're negative. Harm us and others. And others, absolutely. I'm glad you threw that in. Yeah. There's also some science that tells us that if we're speaking in a negative way, that impacts the biology of other people. Because, as well as our own, as well as coming from us. Absolutely, as well as our own, okay? So it's definitely, we know because of what I've just said that it affects us, but it also impacts the other people because of the way they're listening. Yeah. So if they're listening to you say negative things, then their mind is interpreting that information in a negative way, which is then affecting their own biology as well. Yeah, right? Huge. So I guess, we kind of owe it, let's think about relationships and families. We kind of owe it to our relationships and our families to be able to do our best. Now, we're not going to be perfect. No, absolutely. None of us are, right? So let's not put so much pressure on ourselves to feel that we're going to be doing this all the time. But if we can do our best to most of the time, or even 50% of the time. Is an improvement. Be talking in a way that's in admiration of people. I love that word, admiration. Word, so good. Because it is. And we just don't hear about it enough. Like, I don't think many of us would, even describe ourselves as admiring our partners or our kids or You're right, we don't. I don't think I've heard anyone use that word. I'm going to use that this week. You're right. I challenge you to use it this week. So maybe everyone can take that on. Maybe everyone this week can practice being admiration of everything that they do at work, the way that they're interacting with the kids, the way that they're talking with their colleagues, the way that they're thinking about their partner. And even if you have situations that make it hard for you to admire people because of the kinds of people they are, there is that. That's right. Practice it in your mind. Even if not in real life. But I think something amazing happens if there is someone that's not being particularly admirable and you find a tiny little thing about them, then they would lean more into that, wouldn't they? They'd lean more into behaviours that are more admirable. And I think, and I've chosen admirable but there's so many obviously positive other emotions that we're talking about. But it does stand out because I remember there was a member that I worked with and I hadn't seen him for a long time.
when I knew him, his kids were very little, and now his kids are all in their 20s. And we reconnected and doing some work together. And he described his kids, and he just said, he goes, they amaze me every day that they even speak and walk around and that they're these fully functioning human beings. And I'm thinking, like, I remember sitting back going, that's so huge. Like, you're in admiration that your kids speak. Like, do you know what I mean? It's almost, I think he was just saying, a sense of self-pride that he's taken these little babies and now look at them as fully functioning adults.
Absolutely.
You know, and I thought, wow, that's so cool. You know, that's so cool.
Yeah, look, can you see, it's put a smile on our face just talking about this. Right? That's as simple as it gets, just one word, admiration.
Yeah.
And it's had us look at something in a way it's left me feeling tingly, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Marie Anderson. I think that's a good note to finish off, is leaving ourselves feeling tingly with good, positive emotions. That was just a huge unpack of a show going through emotions. Now, thank you so much for
I enjoyed it.
coming out and sharing.
No worries.
Thanks for joining me on this segment from Wellbeing Wednesdays, as heard live on 88.6 Plenty Valley FM. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who might find it helpful and subscribe so you never miss a show. Want to catch the live broadcast? Well, you can tune in Wednesdays from 12 till 2 p.m. on 88.6 Plenty Valley FM, or find my info on Wellbeing Wednesdays with Snez, the Facebook group. Take care, stay healthy, and remember, it's the little choices every day that create big changes. Talk soon.